In the summer of 1974, a 30-year-old architecture professor in Budapest sat at a wooden work table surrounded by cardboard models, rubber bands, and paper clips, trying to solve a problem that had nothing to do with toys. His name was Rubik. He was not trying to build a puzzle. He was trying to understand something: how 26 individual pieces of wood could move independently around a shared center without falling apart. He had been staring at this structural question for months. The answer, when it finally came to him in the form of a small cube held together by an internal mechanism he carved himself, did not immediately strike him as interesting to anyone but himself. Then he tried to put it back. He had scrambled the faces of his prototype, rotating the layers the way you would rotate a combination lock, and found himself staring at a problem he had no idea how to undo. It took him, by his own account, over a month to solve the object he had just invented. That small wooden cube, held together with rubber bands in a professor's apartment in communist Hungary, would eventually sell more than 500 million units, become the best-selling toy in human history, spawn a global competitive sport, and sit today in the permanent collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So how did a structural thought experiment, built by a single man with cardboard and rubber bands in a landlocked Eastern European country under communist rule, become the most recognized object in the history of play? This story does not start in Budapest. It starts much earlier, in the oldest playgrounds of the human mind, with the puzzle itself. Human beings have been drawn to mechanical puzzles for as long as there is written evidence of anything resembling leisure. Ancient Greek texts describe a puzzle called the loculus of Archimedes, 14 ivory pieces that could be rearranged into thousands of different shapes, only one of which was a perfect square. Roman children played with dissection puzzles made from bone. In Tang Dynasty China, craftsmen produced tangrams, 7 flat pieces that could form thousands of configurations, but only one complete square. In every civilization sophisticated enough to have surplus time, some version of the same question appeared. Here are the pieces. Now put them back. The puzzle was never purely entertainment. It was always, underneath the surface, a meditation on order and chaos, the human compulsion to take a broken thing and make it whole. Philosophers noticed. The Stoics wrote about it. Medieval scholars used mechanical puzzles as metaphors for the complexity of divine creation. The puzzle was never just a toy. It was a mirror held up to the mind, trying to understand itself. The jigsaw puzzle, invented in London around 1760 by a cartographer named John Spilsbury, who mounted maps on wood and cut them into pieces as a teaching tool for geography, was the first puzzle to achieve anything close to mass production. By the 1800s, jigsaw puzzles were manufactured across Europe and America, sold initially as educational instruments for wealthy children, before gradually descending the class ladder as manufacturing costs fell. During the Great Depression, cardboard jigsaw puzzles became one of the most popular forms of entertainment in the United States, precisely because they were cheap, reusable, and could occupy an entire evening. A puzzle, unlike a book, could be shared. But none of these puzzles had a third dimension. None of them moved. That distinction matters. A flat puzzle, once solved, is solved. It sits there. You can admire it. You put it back in the box. A mechanical puzzle, one that transforms in 3-dimensional space, where every move affects every other move, is something categorically different. Every turn changes the problem. The object is never passive. It pushes back. The first serious attempts at three-dimensional mechanical puzzles appeared in the late 19th century, mostly as novelty patents filed by tinkerers and inventors who sensed something the market had not yet named. In 1893, a Canadian inventor named Charles Peavy patented a spherical puzzle built around a rotating internal mechanism. It went nowhere commercially. In 1921, an American named W.E. Gustafson patented something closer to a rotating cube. Nobody bought it. In 1970, just 4 years before Rubik sat down at his work table, an American engineer named Larry Nichols built a 2x2 rotating cube held together by magnets and filed a patent for it. He tried to sell the idea to a toy company called Moleculon, and then to several larger manufacturers. They all passed. Here is the detail worth sitting with. When Rubik built his prototype in 1974, he was not aware of Nichols's patent. He was not aware of Peavy. He was not aware of Gustafson. He arrived at the rotating cube independently, from a completely different direction, not from toy history, not from puzzle history, but from architecture, from a structural question about how pieces could move around each other without disintegrating. The specific genius of Rubik's mechanism, the internal pivot that allowed all 6 faces to rotate independently around a shared core, was not something he found in a catalog. He carved it by hand, filed a Hungarian patent for it in 1975, and then spent most of the next year simply playing with it. He called it the Magic Cube. Getting the Magic Cube out of Hungary was not simple. This is where the story becomes something most people who own a Rubik's Cube do not know. Hungary, in the mid-1970s, was a communist state. Private enterprise was heavily restricted. Intellectual property, in the Western sense of a patent generating royalties for an individual inventor, operated under entirely different rules. Rubik's Cube was manufactured initially by a Hungarian state toy company called Polytechnica and sold in small numbers inside Hungary beginning in 1977. It did not immediately change anything about the world. What changed was a chance encounter at a Budapest toy fair in 1979, where a Hungarian businessman named Tibor Laxi, who happened to be carrying a sample of the cube, ended up sitting across from a British toy expert named Tom Kremer. Kremer looked at the object. He could not put it down. He arranged a meeting with the Ideal Toy Company in New York and walked into their offices with a prototype. The Ideal Toy Company almost did not take the meeting. They agreed to distribute it. They renamed it. The Magic Cube became the Rubik's Cube, named after its inventor in the branding decision that, as it turned out, was the single most valuable piece of nomenclature in toy history. They launched it in Western markets in 1980. What happened next outpaced every projection the toy industry had built any model for. By 1981, the Rubik's Cube was the best-selling toy on Earth. By 1982, global sales had exceeded 100 million units. Rubik's Cube books, solution guides, mathematical analyses, philosophical meditations on the object filled bestseller lists. A Hungarian architecture professor's structural thought experiment had, within roughly 2 years of reaching Western markets, become a cultural object unlike anything the toy industry had previously produced. And then, almost as suddenly as it had arrived, it collapsed. By 1983, sales had fallen off a cliff. Stores were returning unsold inventory. The boom had lasted approximately 3 years, and the toy industry largely wrote it off as a fad, something that had burned bright and burned out, like hula hoops and pet rocks before it. Rubik's Cube disappeared from most mainstream retail shelves by the mid-1980s. If you are finding this story interesting so far, go ahead and subscribe, because what happened next is the part most people never hear, and it is the part that explains why a toy that was declared dead in 1984 is still being purchased by millions of people today. The Rubik's Cube did not die. It went underground. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, something quiet was happening in basements and bedrooms and school cafeterias. People who had bought cubes during the boom years had never stopped playing with them. Small communities of enthusiasts, most of them teenagers, most of them with no connection to each other, were not just solving the cube, they were competing to solve it faster. The first official Rubik's Cube World Championship had actually been held in Budapest in 1982, at the height of the original boom. A Vietnamese-American teenager named Minh Thai won it, solving a scrambled cube in 22.95 seconds. After the boom collapsed, no second championship was held for 20 years. But the solving did not stop. It just moved to places the market could not see. In 1981, a mathematician at MIT named David Singmaster published a notation system, a standardized language for describing moves on the cube using letters: R for right face, L for left face, U for up, D for down. Singmaster's notation did for speed cubing what musical notation did for composition. It gave people a shared language to write down solutions, compare them, teach them, build on them. Methods began circulating in photocopied newsletters, later in early internet forums, later still in rudimentary websites. A community was forming in the margins, invisible to the mainstream market that had already moved on. The internet changed everything. In the early 2000s, speedcubers who had been solving in isolation suddenly found each other. YouTube, which launched in 2005, gave them a stage. Videos of teenagers solving the cube in under 20 seconds attracted millions of views from people who had assumed, based on their own experience, that the cube was essentially unsolvable. The World Cube Association, the governing body for competitive speed cubing, was founded in 2004. The second World Championship was held that same year. This is where the mechanism that turned a declared dead fad into a permanent institution becomes visible. The cube had survived the collapse of its first market because it had generated, almost accidentally, a community that needed no market to sustain it. The puzzle was hard enough to last. It did not run out. You could always get faster. You could always find a new method. You could always find someone faster than you to learn from. In 2008, a teenager named Eric Ackersdyke solved the cube in 7.08 seconds and broke the world record. Today, the world record stands at 3.13 seconds, set in 2023 by Max Park, an American whose parents have credited competitive cubing with helping him develop fine motor skills affected by his autism diagnosis. The record has been broken more than 40 times since the World Cube Association began officially tracking it. The toy the market declared dead in 1984 now has a global competitive circuit, sanctioned events in over 80 countries, a world record that continues to fall, and a community of competitive solvers numbering in the hundreds of thousands. Here is the strange turn the story takes next. The Rubik's Cube, 50 years after it was carved by hand in a Budapest apartment, has become simultaneously the best-selling toy in history and a serious object of mathematical study. The total number of possible configurations of a standard 3x3 cube is 43,252,374,489,856,000. 43 quintillion. That number sat unresolved for decades as a theoretical problem. What is the minimum number of moves required to solve any possible configuration of the cube, no matter how scrambled? Mathematicians called this number God's number, meaning the number of moves an all-knowing solver would never need to exceed. It took until 2010 for a team of researchers working with Google's computing infrastructure to run calculations that would have taken a standard computer 63 years to prove the answer: 20 moves. Every single one of the 43 quintillion possible configurations of the Rubik's Cube can be solved in 20 moves or fewer. That proof required 15 years of work from multiple research teams and more computing power than most governments could have assembled in 1980. A toy a professor carved from wood to answer a structural question about architecture turned out, when examined carefully, to contain a mathematical problem that required the most powerful computers in the world to close. Today, the Rubik's Cube is manufactured at a rate of roughly 15 million units per year, 50 years after its invention. It has been translated into dozens of variations: 2x2, 4x4, 5x5, one-dimensional, dodecahedral, each generating its own subset of competitors, methods, and record holders. The original cube sits in MoMA's Permanent Design Collection, acquired in 1981 as an object of functional beauty. It has appeared in the hands of presidents and astronauts, been referenced in Supreme Court opinions, and been used by educators worldwide as a teaching tool for mathematical group theory, spatial reasoning, and the psychology of persistence. Erno Rubik, now in his late 70s, still gives interviews. He is still asked, in every one of them, whether he has found a faster way to solve it. He still does not hold the world record. He has said publicly that what surprised him most in 50 years of watching other people interact with his object was not the competitive speed, not the mathematical depth, not the sales numbers. It was the look on a person's face in the first few seconds after they picked it up, that moment of contact, the hands turning the faces, the mind beginning to sense the depth of the problem, was something he had not designed for. He had designed a mechanism. The experience of being humbled by it was something the cube generated on its own, in every pair of hands that ever held it, across 50 years, across every culture that encountered it. It was there on a work table in Budapest, in the summer of 1974, in a professor's hands, a structural problem looking for a solution. It was there at the 1982 World Championship in Budapest, in the hands of a teenage boy who solved it in under 23 seconds, while the crowd held its breath. It was there in the basements and bedrooms of the 1990s, in the hands of teenagers who had no name for what they were doing and no audience for how fast they were doing it. It was there in the early YouTube videos that proved to a generation raised on its unsolvability that it could, in fact, be solved. It was there in the Google servers running through the night in 2010, proving that 20 moves were always enough. It was there in Max Park's hands in 2023, 3.13 seconds, world record, and the crowd already screaming before he even looked up. And it is there right now, almost certainly within walking distance of wherever you are sitting, in a drawer, on a shelf, still scrambled from the last time someone picked it up and could not put it back together, waiting with exactly the same patience it has always had. Not bad for a thought experiment about architecture that a professor in Budapest never intended anyone else to see. If any part of this surprised you, let me know which part in the comments, because the mathematics alone could fill another video entirely. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe, because there are a lot more coming,